morning, members and guests. Let us convene the meeting of the Board of Equalization Informational Workshop presented by Ms. Etna Murphy and team. Please come forward. Yeah, what happened to the team? It just isn't enough seats for all of you? Is that how it works? All right.
Good morning, Chairman Horton and members. I'm Edna Murphy, Deputy Director of Administration. First, let me thank you for this opportunity to present this informational workshop. Over the last 6 years, the BOE has done some outstanding work that includes the implementation of e-services, AB 155 Use Tax Nexus, tax gap initiatives, statewide compliance and outreach program, and fire fee, just to name a few. Many of these programs were during a time when the state of California was in a serious fiscal crisis. Both the administration and the legislature looked to BOE to help close the gap. Now that our fiscal climate has improved, we look forward and are excited about what is on the horizon. As legislation is discussed in the area of cannabis, motor vehicle fuel, and electronic cigarettes, we want to take all the lessons learned from the past and position BOE for even greater success in the future. We can't really have a discussion about BOE without addressing our revenue. We are pleased to report that during fiscal year 14-15, our revenue collection is estimated to be $60.5 billion, up $3.3 billion from the previous year. This represents tax collected for sales and use tax, special tax and fees, and property tax. The revenue we collect and distribute is critical to maintaining the state and local government programs that benefit our communities today and in the future. In addition, we broke the chart out by voluntary compliance and non-voluntary compliance. Our definition of voluntary compliance is the assumption or principle that taxpayers will comply with tax laws and, more importantly, accurately report. The processes that we have in place to assist that compliance includes, but is not limited to, our e-services that are made up of our e-register, e-file, and e-pay, as well as our outreach and educational seminars and our return processing. Our non-voluntary compliance refers to our enforcement activities that includes audit, collections, investigations, and inspection. The next slide shows two charts, the first being accounts by equalization district, and the second is the field operation department staffing level by equalization district. As you can see, the percentage of the staff to account almost equate, but there are a number of factors that are considered in our staffing model, such as the size of the company and the type of industry. We have two staffing models, the audit staffing model and the compliance staffing model, that identifies recommended staffing level using existing number of personnel years for each district office based on various workload factors. Certain positions and classifications are considered fixed and do not get reallocated. Examples would be our cashiers, reception staff, and escrow staff. The audit staffing model used the candidacy file, which means accounts are coded by difficulty and stratified by the potential of non-compliance. The compliance staffing model uses the number of AR billings and cases and delinquencies. Consistent workload thresholds are used for all districts to distribute existing PYs. While BOE is not under the administration, our operating funding is and requires the approval process outlined by the Department of Finance and the legislature. Historically, BOE's budget has been what we call a category budget, which means that we get our appropriation by personal services and operating expense and equipment. This chart shows that BOE has always stayed within our respective allocation for both categories. Another significant point to make about this chart is that it represents funding for both the general fund and special fund. More specifically, the $6.3 million savings you see in 14-15 represents $3.8 million for special funds and $2.5 million for general fund. Effective this year, BOE is now in a program budget, which means we have the ability to move fund between personal services and OE&E. While this definitely provides us with more flexibility, it does require more management oversight, internal controls, and transparency. We have already begun to put policies in place to ensure that we continue to manage within our appropriation. However, we do face some challenges. Let me first start by explaining that all positions are funded at mid-step through the budget process. This is done based on the expectation that we will have employees above the mid-step and employees below the mid-step, and that overall it will balance out. However, the BOE has a large number of employees that are above the mid-step. This is good because we had a lot of seasoned and knowledgeable employees who stay because they enjoy working for the BOE. However, the managers and supervisors have to balance not filling vacancies to ensure they do not exceed their respective funding allocation. This is further complicated by the fact that we have an aging workforce and retirement cash outs are funded with our existing appropriation. We currently have 1,665 employees over the age of 50. That equates to 34.4% of our workforce. While we know that it's not unique to BOE, but to all state agencies, we want to be proactive to start addressing this issue. The BOE has been very strategic in balancing our vacancies with our use of our temp help blanket. Specifically for the implementation of fire fee, we had to utilize permanent intermittent staff to ensure that we met all legislative mandates and implementation deadlines. As we move forward, we continue to move employees where appropriate from the blanket into vacancies. As of October, we are down to 165 employees in the blanket, of which only 30 are permanent. As I close, I want to thank the board and Ms. Bridges for allowing me to present at this special workshop and leave you with some action items, or better yet, some go-forward strategies for the operation. Action 1. As previously indicated, as an organization, we need to identify the specific positions that we will hold vacant to ensure that we can cover the gap between staffing above the mid-step and the retirement cash out. Action 2. Look at workload metrics for BOE to assist in process improvement. Action 3. Consider strategies that allow the BOE to expand its operation to provide even greater efficiency in leveling the playing field for the California businesses. This may include options to consider optimizing our staffing levels with the objective of providing even greater service to our permit holders. Action 4. Develop and revise operational policies and guidelines to ensure internal controls are adequate and effective. And Action 5, look at opportunities to develop operation reports for transparency and executive management decision. This concludes my report, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you. Discussion members, Member Ma. No. Member Run.
Get situated here. Thank you, Edna, for this. It's very helpful. And I appreciate also the specific issues that you followed up on in regards to some of our issues and discussions that we kind of wanted to identify. Let me just kind of start with a couple of observations. See where I am here. Oh, okay. Let's start with the chart about mid-step and those over. Just to clarify the pie graph, yes. Just to clarify, this is not an unusual issue for a state agency.
Not at this time, no.
Right. I mean, we deal with this, but so does a lot of other state agencies.
Correct.
In regards to the fact of over the mid-step, and then the challenge then is in the budgeting process. As you said, when then the budget comes out and it's budgeted at the at the mid-step, and so therefore it appears then in kind of the macro view is that the state is carrying a bunch of vacancies. And it's interesting. I spent 4 years in doing budget vice chair over in the assembly, And it was during a time that, at times when we were trying to figure out where to get some money, right? And so you'd have these collective amount of state vacancies. You know, there'd be like, I don't know, 20,000 of them or 50,000 of them, right? Right. And you'd have 50,000 state vacancies. And then when you wanted to then somehow balance the budget, the legislature would then go ahead and say, okay, let's go ahead and cut all the vacancies. When in reality, that really didn't accomplish anything because the vacancies weren't filled because the money wasn't there. But what you had is but you still had an amount of money that was, in theory, assigned to every vacancy. And so it's interesting to me that as I think back, and as we were going through these dialogues, you know, that's 10 years ago now, the fact is that it was almost more budget magic than it was reality. Because you'd be cutting positions and therefore cutting vacancies, and in theory then saying, oh, look, we can go ahead and now take off our books $100 million because we cut these vacancies. But in fact, that $100 million was being spent on the other employees. And so in this particular issue, I think the bottom line, I think you brought it out, and I appreciate that, is our response to this then is that we have to carry ongoing vacancies. We can't staff up all the positions to which we have been allocated. And so that becomes, and so in theory, what we end up doing is we end up having to do the same job based upon how many people we said we needed to do the job, because that's how we got the positions. But we don't have all the people to do the job because we have to maintain these vacancies in order to not go over budget. And in fact, parenthetically, I'd like to put one of the things I asked you for, because I think it's important for everybody to understand, because again, people think, well, where you know, this idea of where are these employees over the midline? And because in theory, you know, I've had people say, well, they're all at headquarters or they're all out in the field. And what you had given to me, and I don't know if the other members had gotten a copy of this, but it is really helpful to me, and that is in the district out in the field, we were 27% over the midline and 27% under the midline and 73% over the midline.
Correct.
And then actually in the non-field, we were 31% below the midfield and 69% above the midfield. So, I mean, the reality is we're pretty close, but actually we're actually more over the midline in field than we are at headquarters. Is that a fair?
Correct.
Yeah. Not by a lot, but I mean that's
right.
it's not like it's a dramatic change, but I think that's important for people to understand, because again, if somebody looked at the whole chart, they'd say, yeah, it's all those folks over there that make this the problem. That being said, I think, and the other thing I appreciate that I know Field has done, Wayne and whatnot in developing, and that's one of the things that I appreciated over the last couple of years was the staffing model was a bit of a black box for a while. And I appreciated the fact that in the last couple of years, there's been a little more transparency and knowledge as to how we came up with a field staffing model. And because I think that's that's important, and it's a good justification as to why we do. And so one of the things that's interesting to me is that in the field, we've got this staffing model, and it's based upon the very, very specific information, right? You know, the number of counts, complexity of accounts, you know, the delinquency issues. And because of all of this, we need X amount of people to do these jobs. And so that's how we have that in the field. What we don't have is we don't have that evaluation for the rest of the BOE. We don't have an evaluation to say, how many people do we actually need in this department based upon what the load is? What we have, you know, we really don't have that internal evaluation inwardly in regards to those other areas. And I think especially that's going to be important when we talk about maintaining vacancies. Because at the end of the day, we have to decide where those vacancies are. And I think you actually made that as one of your points. Because I'm concerned, and you rightfully pointed it out, because if you don't identify where those vacancies are, then it's kind of like we have this number of vacancies, and let's just pick a number, 200. So we have to maintain 200 vacancies. Well, if you don't know where they are, then when somebody in the field wants to hire somebody, we got to decide whether or not that's one of the 200 vacancies we can't fill at that time, depending upon where we are. When in fact, that might be the most important place for us to fill. And so I think the idea of identifying where those vacancies need to be placed strategically for our mission is going to be really important. And of course, the other issue about vacancies is the vacancies assume a certain salary, but not everybody makes the same salary.
Right.
So we can hold a vacancy, for instance, in a tax tech, and it's worth, I don't know, 30 grand.
Right.
But yet we can also hold a vacancy in somebody else in a position that is a very highly paid individual, and it could be 100 grand. So therefore, the fact is, depending upon what position you hold in the vacancy, is going to determine how many vacancies you actually have to hold.
Correct.
So I really appreciate, and I think we need to do that kind of evaluation in terms of saying, okay, how is our staffing model outside? We've done it in the field. How do we do staffing model inwardly in regards to these other areas to determine that? And then how do we then prioritize where these vacancies have to go? I think that's going to be an important step as we now implement the issues that are here. The other thing I appreciated then, and I asked you for, because again, when we talk about the number of dollars that are surplus or savings or reverted, I think when we talked, I always like, savings makes me sound like I've got the money in the bank.
Right.
I don't have this money in the bank. It's now belongs to the general fund, and so that's why I prefer the word reverted. I appreciate the fact, because I was concerned that maybe some of our savings or reverted was a result of being, for instance, understaffed in special taxes, but overstaffed in general fund. And it's clear in your presentation, in your work, that no, we actually reverted money in both of those categories,
Right.
Which is important because obviously we can't move money back and forth, and so therefore the balance of that reversion is important to me. So anyhow, that's my thoughts and comments right now, and there may be more. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Renner. Member Harkey?
Hi, thank you so very much. I'm really, really pleased with this. I think it was really important with the new board and with transferring operations to the field and budgets to the field that we all at least understand where we're starting from and some of the decisions that were made in the past and the way that we had to balance our budget in the lean times, and my biggest thing, I think, the eye-opener was that PYs did not actually mean bodies and seats. They were dollar allocations, and I think that was very important for the whole board to understand and for everybody out in the audience to understand that, yeah, might have PYs, but those are your dollar allocations. And if in fact you've chosen to promote and have increases, and that's over the midpoint, then that's taking from part of the PY. And I do believe, isn't it true that if there's a COLA adjustment or something, that adds on the governor's budget, adds a certain PY allocation?
So when we get like the 2.5%, that was an adjustment to all of the PYs that we have. So it was kind of a budget adjustment, a technical adjustment that we did when we got the funding, but it's funding tied to that adjustment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, to get more specific, the audit model uses a candidacy file. Accounts are coded by difficulty and probably stratified by probability. And I have a question because I understand the difficult cases could be stratified in the district such that there was always a need for more PYs at higher and higher level PYs. And so are we using candidates for PYs or actual selected cases, audited selected cases that the districts are doing?
Here comes the expert.
Here comes our expert.
Here comes the team.
Yes.
Team. Could you announce
Morning,
yourself?
members. Thank you. Yes, for the candidacy pool, yes, we do take
My apologies. Could you introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, yes.
please?
My name is Wayne Mashihara. I'm the chief of the Field Operations Department. So, yes, for the candidacy pool, yes, we do take the pool of candidates that are eligible, and each district that has the responsibility or had conducted the audit for that account would be given the, let's say, workload credit for that respective account that would be under their jurisdiction or the audit candidacy that they would be eligible.
So it's by candidacy, not the actual selection of audits that the district would make?
That is correct.
Okay, that might be something we might want to look into, because as, you know, I mean, I'm just thinking, as we start looking at complexity of accounts, we could conceivably have one district just doing all of their more difficult accounts, and another district being very strategic and saying, I'm gonna do a couple this time, couple that time, a couple this time, and that way, you know, they keep the difficulty and the higher level PYs always available. We need to kind of look at that and see if we can't work on that a little bit going forward.
Well, certainly, I would, always be watching and mindful to look at those things, but let me give a further explanation. The candidacy pool is taken at a point in the past, so a district would not be able to, let's say, going
Stratify.
forward to try to stratify. Well, I mean, every district probably would be selecting at those higher stratified levels, because typically the candidates that are larger, more difficult, have better potential. So they would be always doing that. But for them to specifically try to, let's say, target a year, that would do no effect on the staffing model, because the candidacy pool that they were aiming for would be a point in the future, whereas the candidacy pool that we have used for doing the allocations based upon the workload is in the past, so they could not touch that or change that. And then I would think most districts would, just do the work, and I would be, surprised that they would try to, target a specific year
I'm
to
never
do that.
surprised. Okay, I want that understood. Never surprised. I just want to be sure that when we're
Sure.
doing our allocations, because I do think that, as Senator Runner brought up, we're going to want, as from the board, some suggestions as to how we allocate going forward, because we have split this up from headquarters to field, and I don't want there to continue to be the, headquarters getting the advantage, field's got the advantage. I want to be sure we understand exactly. And as members need different help in their districts, we want to be sure we're allocating. So I think it's important to at least look at, and I thank you for your explanation. You told us how many people are actually still in the blanket. For the future, could we find out, just for the board or whatever, where they're actually located? And I think it would be very helpful to know by the district and by headquarters how many vacancies we have to maintain in order to balance the budget at the end of the year. And I think Mr. Runner brought up maybe we need a staffing model for departments. And like I said, I will want to know from staff some recommendations as to what our options would be from the board for making hiring choices in the future, because since everybody's not going to be able to fill their vacancies, at the board we'll probably need to decide how that is split up, how we see the needs, how to allocate the available PYs with the monies available, and the grades of the positions, like, where in the district as well as in headquarters, what are, I call them salary grades. I'm not sure what we term them at the BOE, but the salary grade, the level, what are those levels, so that we know what would be available. And if there was, can we break down the O&E budget for the field as well as the headquarters? And I think that's it for right now. I just know we're going to have some future engagement on this, and I want to be sure that we're all kind of prepped for what we may need to analyze going forward. Thank you very much. You've been very, very good. I appreciate all the input into this and the work and the effort, and you did it very timely, Ms. Murphy. I think it was only a couple weeks ago that you were asked to get it done, and you have made the rounds with, I think, the members' offices and actually for this presentation, so I thank you very much.
Thank you. With my team.
Yeah, with your team. You definitely have a team. Great people, thank you.
Member Stowar.
Quick questions. As far as the audit model, do we take into account or do we factor in new permittees so that we can get to them sooner than later to make sure that they're understanding the rules? 'Cause I don't know, a lot of times we get hearings and it's the first time audit, but they've been in business for quite some time. And I've always thought that the goal was to get out there and conduct the audit as early as possible so that we have the opportunity to provide education. That
Well,
is the goal.
The
but-
new permittees would be that candidacy pool, but it would be, a change in our work practices, because, we do actually go out there and we do these consultations, but on an ongoing basis, our bread and butter work is pretty much in the audit area. We could, in future models, take into consideration if there is a growing share to factor that in and try to, do a workload adjustment for that in a future staffing model.
We're interested to see how it could work. I'm not saying to do it, but it would be interesting to see if we can get that education out as soon as possible so that they don't continue making mistakes.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's a good idea. Thank you.
And then my other question is to Ms. Murphy. You gave us a pie chart showing 71% over the mid-step when we have an aging workforce. So what's our succession planning?
So we have developed our internal succession plan, and we've provided it for CalHR for approval. So some of the things that we're doing is we're trying to document a lot more of our procedures. We're looking in areas where we see that we have employees that may be close to the retirement age, and we're trying to do transition strategies and training to make sure that that knowledge is kept within the organization. We have started some work. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, as I mentioned before, because we're talking about 34.4% of our workforce. That's huge. And so we're continuing to work in that area as well.
Thank you.
Member Ma.
So, thank you. When I first started this job back in January, we had a budget problem. And I know that you, Ms. Bridges, and Ms. Murphy came in and briefed me on some of the corrective actions for 2014 to 2015, which was no new hires, no promotions or promotions in place, no new out-of-class assignments, no classification upgrades, no paid overtime. And then effective January 29th, the BOE would suspend the work of retired annuitants, permanent intermittent employees, and a couple of other categories. And I think you all did a great job in following the corrective action, and I think it worked. By putting some controls into our expenses. But then we were told in July that we hopefully would, fix the budget problem and that we would be able to hire more people. And that's what, I went out to all of my offices to say, yes, we should be better in the next fiscal year. We'll be able to hire. And like, Wayne, Mr. Mashahara just said, the audit is the bread and butter of the operations, right? So having people out in the field, auditors, collectors, compliance folks, I think should be the priority. And I know a lot of my district administrators, they've been applying, putting in applications for more field personnel. And we've only, I think, been able to hire 4 new people. But in the meantime, I've been trying to understand the staffing model. How many staff each office gets? Are we going to get more in the future? The whole thing. And I think that's why we're here, is because, understanding that there's vacancies that we can't fill, some of the attrition issues. And so, I appreciate in August 12th, I finally got a, proposed total of how many employees are in each district, the proposed total, and then the changes. in terms of how many staff we are going to lose. And I think that needs to be better communicated to the field. It's very demoralizing when we tell them that they're going to be able to hire more people, and then they're rejected for their proposals. So I think that communication needs to be better, better communicated to everyone. If, like my district, we're going to lose 16 people, where are they going to come from, right? And I know there's going to be a whole realignment, and that is the proposal. So I think we need to better prepare everyone and communicate. I also have been concerned because we've been missing the DOF forecast in terms of collections. Just in this fiscal year, July, August, and September, we have not met the DOF forecast projections, and that's what also prompted me to ask, when are we going to hire more people? If that is how we generate the revenues in our agency, we have to be able to hire more people. So we either meet the forecast, or we need to let the governor's office know that we're not going to meet the forecast. So for the last 3 months, we have not met the forecast, and that kind of concerns me. Also, in terms of the recent hiring, I know we got a list of recent hires as of July 1st, and it seemed that the proportion was headquarters heavy. And I know that there is some explanation to that in terms of some are special funds. But again, if we're going to be hiring, we need to communicate to folks, are they special funds, or are they needed? Why are they needed in certain positions versus out in the field? So I'm just happy. Thank you, Ms. Harkey, for for asking for this. Thank you for the administration for providing more information. But I think if we're a tax collection agency, we should be focused on hiring more people in the field to do what is mission critical for our agency first and foremost. So that's just my 2 cents about my last 10 months here. And I appreciate more information and data that's been provided so that I can better explain to the staff in the districts why they're not getting any additional support, and they need to be able to adjust their workload as well, instead of waiting and backloading a lot of the cases. If we're not going to get the support, then we're going to have to figure out how to address the current cases that are out there, and the different types of audits that are going to continue. So I appreciate the ongoing communication and information. I would just encourage us to do more communication, more transparency, provide us with more data so that we also understand what's going on and can communicate better to our field.
No,
Well, I've taken down all of the requests.
well, here, I guess you're trying to take it all in. So let me share some thoughts here. First and foremost, I think it's important. I think what Member Runner and the members have brought out is important, because what I hear them saying is that we want a very balanced approach, that we're balancing all of the workload, all of the issues that exist for the agency, and then we begin to prioritize those issues based on the priorities established by the legislature, as well as the mission of the Board of Equalization. But the reality is, to the district as well as the headquarters and so forth, that really gets us closer to the concept of the one BOE. And because we're just one fundamental organization, we're not divided into different districts versus Sacramento. It's not a competitive thing. And so I think the suggestion to begin to look at the workload, look at the intricacies of the positions and so forth is very wise, to be able to provide that information so that decisions can be made on a collaborative, collective sort of basis, if you will. And then to have a further discussion about the direct versus indirect cost of the Board of Equalization. The workload analysis that takes place in the district, a lot of that also takes place in determining positions in Sacramento as well. It's, you know, in going through the BCP process, for example, the call center, it's a very extensive evaluation as to how many PYs are established there. Fire fees, another evaluation of determining. Investigation, another complete evaluation based on performance and another efficiency measures occurs there. And I think it's important that we share that information, and at the same time position, because in sharing the information you actually position the members to prioritize in their mind, or to participate, if you will, in prioritizing those issues. At the same time, I think you have that unified effort, a unified discussion among the district expertise and wisdom with those that occur here in Sacramento. And what may come out of that is some of the strategies that Member Stowart has suggested, Member Harkey, and Member Runner has suggested, that we can look at more efficiency. So instead of looking at the organization as if though the glass is half full, let's take a look at the other half and see if we can fill it up. You know, we've asked Wayne and Mr. Smith to take a look at what point do we reach diminishing returns, and at what point should we actually be, instead of trying to deal with the blanket and the vacancies and so forth, should we be going forth to the legislature and asking for additional positions? And is there a greater efficiency that could occur? Member Harkey and Member Runner has suggested strategies such as initial consultation and expanding our consultation efforts for first-time audits, where an auditor or a compliance person will actually go out and assist them in complying without a liability. And so they're able to make the appropriate corrections and then begin to adjust. Managed audits is another way. Should we be looking at doing additional managed audits, which reduces the labor force or the workload, but increases the efficiency of the organization? So I think there's a huge value in us beginning to look at this organization from a holistic perspective. And particularly if we're looking at it to try to say, is the glass half full, and can we fill it up? You know, can we increase compensation to our employees? And what is that strategy to accomplish that? And what is the argument that we can put forth? As we know, the governor and legislature are primarily interested in revenues. Are you generating the revenues? And this is one of the most productive agencies around, but maybe we need to change that dialogue and to incorporate in the discussion about revenues the compliance aspect of it. The organization generates $60 billion on the compliance side. And so to have more auditors actually out there assisting with initial consultation increases the compliance, and particularly with the ever-changing policies that the legislature is constantly asking us to do. The other is helpful in the BCP process. It allows the members now, you know, when we're knowledgeable and aware of it, we can become advocates for the BC. Historically, the Board of Equalization has not had the significant advocates that exist up here today. And to be able to go forth and advocate for a larger BCP, you know, and a BCP that I say is a pregnant BCP, one that can result in additional positions ultimately, can result in promotional opportunities, because to the extent that the legislature doesn't allow us to necessarily provide raises to our employees, what we can do is figure out an upper mobility strategy that allows us to provide those promotional opportunities, which creates additional vacancies, allows us to bring in the interns and satisfy the need for many of our employees to have additional compensation, have additional staffing, and so forth. All of this comes about by just having that information available. I know that staff is doing a lot of this. I know that some of what I'm saying is not necessarily new. I know that there are studies out there that Mr. Smith is doing and others are doing in order to begin to position the board to make the argument for additional positions, that these additional positions will actually create increased efficiency for the organization. So to that degree, I commend the entire team for all that you're doing and that you will continue to do. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Ms. Bridges, as well. But I think there may be some other questions as we go through. Ms. Harkey.
I would like to kind of take off on what the chairman said. I think we also need to look at areas where there's a lot of employment and outside employment, and there's very few other opportunities for our BOE employees. In Sacramento, it's a government town, and you guys can shop around to different agencies. You have like a lot of flexibility up here to still work within the government structure. I think in San Diego in particular, and even in Irvine, we lose people. We have them for a couple of years and give them a good footing, and then industry takes them off, and so then we're starting again with a brand new person or trying to fill a vacancy. And so I would almost say that as we get into this, I would like to see about maybe trying to figure out where it is that you've got, either a higher cost of living factor or something else. I mean, this is not anything we can do immediately, but I do think it is areas that we can approach the governor with, because I know the companies and the individuals and also the administrators, the experienced people are the ones that bring in, know how to maneuver. Although we don't get most of our income from audit in the district, the audit team is very important, and the collection team is very important. Most of ours is from, as you've shown on the graph, from voluntary compliance, which brings to the point what the chairman was saying, what Senator Runner was saying about the initial just first time audit. But I do think there's a value, and one of the reasons we probably have a lot of people over the mid-range, and I'd like to see us, like I said, figure out where those over mid-range people are actually located, is because I think if you have an experienced person, your return on your investment is a lot greater than constantly churning in people off the street. This is a highly technical, professional position. These are not just clerical jobs. They're technically highly educated, trained people. And I think it makes it different than a lot of other agencies or services that government provides, that we have to have really highly technical, educated, trained people. Not that they're not everywhere, but I think you have to have CPAs, tax attorneys, things that can draw areas that they can draw a lot of money on the outside. And so I think we need to, as we go through, we need to evaluate certain positions for what our real competition is for retaining the key people.
Member Ma.
Yeah, I just want to add on to Chairman Runner and Ms. Harkey as well about the whole structure in terms of pay equity. Even amongst the audit and compliance, there's a disparity. Starting salaries are very low compared to other government agencies. Even the IRS, I think, pays higher than we do. And then, of course, the counties, some of the counties are paying higher, so they're attracting some of our employees. Regional differences, I think, is very important for some of, the district offices. And so I'd really love to see what the plan would be to try to equalize some of the salaries to hire the people that we need, and then also to retain the folks who have been here 10 plus years and encourage them to stay. So that is something that I hope we'll be working on in the next quarter, the next year, to see whether we can help in that. And like you said, we've got people here who have relationships in the building. I think we need to see the studies that are out there. I'm sure they've changed a lot in the last 5 years, and what are people paying, in the private sector versus, the different government sectors, that we can actually go and advocate on behalf of, of our agency. So I look forward to working with you on that, and, would love to maybe at the next informational hearing, actually talk a lot about this, because this is something that I think we're all concerned about.
So maybe we can set up another hearing to talk about, maybe bifurcate these issues so that we can spend more in-depth time on it. In 2002, I did legislation to try to create that parity, and thanks to Ms. Bridges and so forth, we've been able to kind of create a little bit of parity on the entry level for the compliance folks, entry-level compliance folks, entry-level auditor folks, those who come in with degrees and so forth. But there's still more work that we can do. But part of the challenge in having that dialogue with the legislature is the distinction between, well, when utilizing income budget strategies, base budget strategies, what happens is that the greater income for the organization is on the compliance side. And so the efforts on the compliance sides are actually more justified than the efforts on the audit side in the minds of individuals who will look at the audit side and say, well, it generates $700 million, and relative to the $59 billion that is generated by itself. So that whole dialogue, I think the members here can kind of begin to shape a conversation that might be successful in the legislature as to the benefit if you take away the audit staff, excuse me, if you take away the audit staff, then the $59 billion goes down significantly, as with the discussion about the Department of Finance. My response to the Department of Finance is give us more auditors, give us a greater staff, and give us salary increases, and we'll meet your projections. And so I think it's important that we begin to continue these conversations, and that we also be careful about how we approach the relative budget strategies and utilizing them. And at the same time, the fix activity that occurs, sending out the permits, printing, and so forth, those are relatively fixed. They're sort of determined upon the number of permits that we have, which has gone up. But the ones that have some distinctions on the BCPs that we're issuing and doing those analysis, I think we have a little flexibility there. So, this is Mr. Runner.
Yeah, real quick. I want to go back to that one chart regarding the blanket positions and the vacancies real quick. I just had a follow-up question on that. Because I think, did I hear you say that we currently are at 165?
Correct,
And that we thought we'd be, and only 30 of those are full-time.
correct.
But how many of those, by definition of what belongs in what is appropriate blanket, how many positions should we have in the blanket?
So there's no magic number, but one of the things that we were really focused on was first getting all of the permanent people out of the
Right.
blanket. So after we take that out, there is always going to be people in the blanket, and rightfully so, they should be
Right.
there. And so then that was going to be our second evaluations. As mentioned earlier, we've done an excellent job in reducing the number of retired annuitants that we have here. And so I think what we'll start to see is that once we get past that, we'll see that we're now maintaining appropriate
Well,
positions.
let me ask on that then, because I think, is there a specific allocation we have for the blanket?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And if we remove those 30 permanent, are we within that allocation?
I would have to verify that, but I can
Okay.
do that, yeah.
Well, we can just tell me
Okay.
later. Because again, I think our goal should be to get within the proper allocation. Right? I mean, I don't really care how many people are in the blanket. I just want to make sure we're not that we're not overspending the blanket.
Right.
That would be the objective.
I can verify.
So I think that would be the issue that would be helpful to me. The other issue that I would like to maybe throw out to the members here, and that is, I think we've all talked about the fact that we want to make sure that the vacancies are placed in the right place. That we want to make sure, and it's a known, again, so that, all of a sudden somebody in the district office needs to hire somebody, and that's right now where we're going to hold the vacancy, but we don't have a real rational idea as to why we're holding the vacancy there. And so I think, and again, since we're talking so much about efficiency, customer service, I would like to go ahead and suggest and see if the members would be okay with it, that we actually, since we have a committee that does customer service and efficiency, that we would help work with you and Mr. Gao, particularly because I think he's the one who works with us in our committee, to kind of work with that model in terms of trying to see where it is that we hold vacancies and whatnot, and then we can come back then as a committee as a whole and talk with it in that regard. Because I think I'd like to split that out separately from another informational hearing. I'd like to kind of, because that to me is a pretty significant issue for us as to where we hold those, how we deal with them.
I would just opine that I'd rather have it at an informational hearing and then maybe move it over. Because I don't want to be all of a sudden find out. I mean, it's going to take a little while to go along to figure this out, to do this. Because we've asked for models, for a staffing model for headquarters, and I think that's all part of it. So rather than just shoving it off into your committee, I'd kind of like to do this step by step, so that we could at least gather the same information before you get it, if that would be okay.
Well, again, I think that the end result is we want to get to an end result.
I think,
Right.
So I think that, and so again, if you're envisioning at the informational committee to have at the next informational meeting a recommendation that includes a staffing model, where we're going to hold our vacancies.
No, just some more detail, more suggestions. This is all new, and I know that they're busy working, but what I don't want to do is have it get way down into a committee and then all of a sudden at a board hearing get presented with something that I really have to do some background work on. And so I'd like to just kind of go a little slower and
Okay.
be sure I understand.
Again, just to make it clear, anything that happens in a board meeting or in a committee should be fully vetted with members prior to a board meeting. So
Yeah,
again,
but
that's okay. Now again,
why-
if there is
that's why this
consent,
is
I just
nice.
want to get to the end. I just want to get to
Members-
the end of it.
members.
I just,
this isn't a hearing, it's
No.
a
Yeah.
workshop.
Okay,
I just want
know.
to get to the
It's a
end of it
But-
in order to make sure that we are actually working toward an end result, because there is a timeliness issue to this.
Maybe I can.
Right now, we are having people who need to hire people and they don't know if they can hire them.
Right.
So I think that there's a timeliness issue to which we need to actually start working with this. And the problem is, the sooner we get to a solution, the better off we know who not to hire and who to hire in that process. So that's my concern. And if the members feel like they want to have another informational hearing to get more information, that's fine. But ultimately, we've got to be able to help give direction in terms of helping to know where these priorities are.
Yeah, I think the benefit the benefit of this hearing is that even though the committee hearings are open to the public and so forth, we have an opportunity now to include the district administrators and all of the folks who kind of participate. The other challenge in putting in this particular budget into a committee is the dichotomy of the issues. You have program issues, you have fixed, you have budgetary issues, you have issues that really may not have a whole lot to do with customer service, and has more to do with the business tax committee and a little bit more to do with the legislative committee as it relates to the BCP and the legislative process. And so being able to combine those, what we may be looking for in order to get there is having staff begin to go to work on this immediately, taking a look at the organization as one BOE, and identify the priorities that exist in selecting and appointing positions. And then I think you hear different opinions and probably need to vet that out by having individual discussions with the members as to where the priorities are. One being priority on audit, the other being priority on self-compliance and those types of issues. Audit, I think, is a very important function. Otherwise, I wouldn't have did it for 22 years. but it's not the only function of this organization. Compliance is extremely important. The work that happens in the print shop is very, very important. The work that happens at the receptionist desk is extremely important to this organization. And many folks are like the face of this organization. As we began to make these priorities, I, for one, have always prioritized based on the $59 billion and not the $700 million generated by the organization, because when we do that, we put ourselves at an inherent disadvantage in the legislative process. The legislative process says, well, you're like police officers, and you're just making sure that people report properly. We're much more than that as an organization. And so maybe a more deliberative, inclusive process, or maybe we should bifurcate it and just deal with different issues. But this has been, I think, extremely helpful for me to hear from the members, and maybe an opportunity to actually hear from the rest of your team might be helpful as well. So, Member Ma?
I agree. I think this has been very helpful, just so that, folks can kind of hear what's really going on, not just maybe from me or, memos or, rumors. And so I think, these informational hearings are very, very, very productive. And I would like to say, since we do have issues, maybe we could think about doing it every month after the board meeting to talk about vacancies, to talk about staffing models or levels, whatever the issue is, because I think the more we, have these open communication dialogues with everyone, our district, I see my district administrators sitting here. Now they hear what's going on, and we need to also push out the information, the data that we're getting as well. So it's not just us, that see the concerns, but it's everyone as one BOE. We're all working together, but we can't work together unless we all have the same information to work off of. So, I think this was a great idea, a great first hearing. And because of Bagley-Keene issues and others, I think this workshop model kind of works with us. I think, people are understanding a little bit better. We can monitor or adjust expectations in the field, just so that everybody is one BOE. So I appreciate everyone being here and, everyone working together, and the board members also, Ms. Harkey, suggesting this, because I think this is very, very helpful.
Member Harkey.
Hi, this is from my city council days, and we used to have some decisions on how to run the city, and you can't do that with more than one member if you may have to vote on something because of Bagley-Keene. So we have this open hearing where we can all talk back and forth, and each member can hear the same information at the same time. And that's so important, because if I'm talking to this one, I have to remember what I said to this one before I talk to that one. And it gets very confusing. So I think this is really a good conversation to be having here in the public. And I look forward to doing more workshops, because I think it's the only time we can really ferret these out, and I get to hear what everybody's saying, and what their concerns are. So thank you. We'll have one next week.
I agree with everybody. I think it's great just to have the workshops, have it on the agenda. Not sure if we need to put it in a committee or establish a new committee. Maybe someone could head another committee, or someone who doesn't have a committee.
You want to be on a committee?
Yeah, from a process standpoint, let me encourage staff to review the tape, take each comment by the members and drill down on it from an informational basis. Some of the things that I may have shared, you may be able to enlighten me on, and certainly I look forward to that. Then begin to share that information with each individual member, and I think that will give staff some direction, or your team some direction, on how to best facilitate and make this thing happen and bring it forward at the next informational hearing. But I do concur with Member Runner relative to some of, and Member Ma, relative to some of the misconceptions out there as it relates to what's happening in one district versus another district and so forth, in Sacramento versus the district, and we've had these issues for 35 years, to my knowledge. So now is a good time to begin to address those publicly. And let's see if we can get it done as soon as possible. Maybe a meeting, a briefing with through the assistant chief of field, with the chief of fields, with all the district administrators, so that they become more aware, and then move that information up to us. So we're using our best and brightest minds in this organization to give the board members the best advice and guidance that you can possibly give us. Comment?
I'm gonna say, it sounds like I have a new assignment.
Mr. Marshar?
Do you need a PY?
Very good input here.
All right. Thank you very much. The BOE budget information hearing is, we're not.
So next, we will have Sherry Mara from legal to do an overview on procurement.
I may need to take a break. Good? Okay. Well, let's see what we can
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Sherry Mura. I'm from the legal department, and I'm here to give you an overview of the procurement process and highlight some important areas. I'm going to explain the process in 3 sections. One is the overview. Secondly, the safeguards for the process. And finally, I'll explain best practices. So the common scenario is that BOE has a business need and staff might say, hey, we need a contract. But in legal, we say, whoa, there's a legal process for that. And the process has a certain procedure. So number one, there's other agencies that oversee the process. And most contracts require competitive bidding. The state procurement process for procuring goods, services, information technology, real estate, public works, that's governed by the Public Contract Code and the Government Code. These statutes provide the authority for state agencies such as the Department of General Services or the Department of Technology to establish procedures and policies through the State Administrative Manual and the State Contracting Manual. The type of procurement vehicle, such as a request for a proposal, an RFP, or a DGS managed leveraged procurement, which they call master contracts, those types of vehicles are designed to accommodate the type of service or the type of good that the BOE needs. Depending on the total amount of the contract, further approvals by General Services or the Department of Technology may be required. So the contract is not fully valid until those approvals are obtained, if they are required. So these statutes and the rules, the procedures and policies governing the procurement process are designed to protect the state's best interests. The competitive bidding process to contract for goods or services is the basic foundation to protect those interests by, number one, keeping a fair playing field for all interested vendors. Number two, providing for the best value and the best quality of service or good for the contracting agency. And number three, eliminating favoritism or bias in order to give all qualified businesses an equal chance at competing for state contracts. So next I'm going to explain the safeguards that are in place for the procurement process to protect the integrity of the procurement. There's a prohibition against conflicts of interest. There's a need for confidentiality, and there's a civil service requirement. So first, the government code prohibits state officers and employees from having a financial interest in any contract. And also there's a prohibition from accepting gifts or any items of any value from contractors or potential contractors. That's in the government code. Such activities are also prohibited by the BOE's Conflict of Interest Code. Secondly, there's a need for a confidentiality. The confidentiality safeguards ensure that the procurement process is not compromised and it maintains its integrity. It's important for the procurement's details to be kept confidential by representatives of the board, especially when there's an active procurement, such as when the BOE is creating an RFP or after the RFP is publicly posted and the BOE is waiting for vendors to submit their proposals. It's important to keep any details, even if they seem innocuous, it's important to keep those confidential, such as any offhand remark, even for a comment on the previous contractor, such as, well, that contractor never answered his phone, or we weren't able to get the add-on that we wanted. Those sorts of remarks can be incorporated into a vendor's RFP and used for a competitive edge in that proposal, just to strike that certain chord in any evaluation team member who might be apt to be influenced in that sort of way. So those sort of details should be kept confidential in order to keep the procurement fair. Finally, there's a civil service requirement for services, contracts. One of the safeguards from the state is that agencies are required to hire within civil service. There are exceptions set out by the government code in section 19130 for exceptions to contract out for services. So each contract for services must meet this government section code 19130 threshold to authorize contracting out. The state employees unions are authorized to file contract challenges in front of the state personnel board if the unions feel that a certain contract has not met this threshold. The state personnel board can make a decision based on either written arguments or an oral hearing and can invalidate that contract. So maintaining the procurement process also helps to avoid bid protests, which, if a contract is protested before award, can delay the start of the services, and ultimately, if the bid protest is upheld by DGS, the contract can be canceled. That would mean a delay in the start of services, the contract is void, and the RFP most likely will need to be revised and reposted for another round of bids to be submitted. Last but not least, with going through these administrative remedies, a vendor could file suit alleging unfair practices against the agency. So best practices. Be aware that most contracts must be competitively bid. Be aware of giving inside information and avoid such a practice. Be mindful that the process, to be fair to all parties, it takes time. And protect yourself and the agency from procurement's pitfalls by seeking advice from legal whenever appropriate. This concludes my general overview of the procurement process. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Member Runner?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's a good overview, but I guess I'm a little taken back in that I have no materials here. And I guess I didn't know that this was, I saw it on the agenda, but there are other things on the agenda I knew were taken off. So I guess what I'd like to encourage, if we're going to have these, as we have these in the future, that we bring materials and that we have the opportunity to be pre-briefed, because actually some of the materials that you talked about would be very helpful to us to have talked about, like with my staff in a pre-briefing, in order for us to kind of answer questions and try to get down to the root of the issue, because quite frankly, I do have some procurement questions. I'm just not prepared for them right now. So anyhow, if we could kind of maybe if you could maybe come back, or not come back to hearing, but maybe we can set up a time for my office after this with the materials and whatnot, and we could kind of go through the procurement. That would be helpful to me. Thanks.
Member Mah?
Yeah, so I have some general questions, I guess. How do we RFP all contracts?
No, certain contracts are subject to requests for proposals, and some are not. It depends on the amount. It depends on what you're trying to procure. And it depends on if there's a master contract that DGS manages. So it depends on the case.
Okay, so I'm not going to talk about DGS contracts that they manage, because I assume they have some sort of process. I'm really trying to figure out what our process is here. So when you say there has to be a certain amount, what is that amount threshold?
There's a threshold of $5,000 and under, which are, those sorts of contracts can be informally bid, and an RFP is not necessarily needed. And then there's a threshold of $50,000 and over, and I'm talking for non-IT services in particular, that those are normally competitively bid, and contracts in that amount need to go to DGS for approval.
Okay, so any contract over $50,000 has to go to DGS
For non-IT services
for non-IT
contracts.
services for approval. And then, so what happens between 5,000 and 50,000?
Well, those are, again, it depends on if you're talking about a service or a good or IT, but usually between those amounts, you can, there's several procurement vehicles, an RFP, what's called an invitation for bid, which is not as complex as an RFP in that when you're inviting vendors to bid, it can be either a low amount wins or a combination of experience and the costing can win. Those are two vehicles.
So anything between 5,000 to 50,000 has to go through an RFP or an invitation for bid.
Right, depending on the service that you need, usually it does have to go through a bid. I'm being careful about that because there are some narrow exceptions for bidding where it's based on the type of service, such as outside legal contracts, anything to that involves litigation, and there's other certain subvention contracts for the public need. There's certain exceptions to competitive bidding, but they're very narrow.
So are these contracting procurement rules on our website someplace? So if a vendor wants to bid on a contract, for example, they can go to a certain page on our website and understand how to, I mean, do we have a database that we send out to invite bidders, or do you have to post on, you know, some media? I'm just trying to figure out if people are
There is.
interested, how do they know the contracts are let?
There's sort of an electronic bulletin board on DGS's website because DGS is the oversight agency for procurement. They have everything that you've mentioned, Ms. Ma, is on the DGS website for interested contractors, interested vendors, how to qualify. Those types of postings are on the DGS website.
Okay, and then so do we have a DBE requirement or preference for certain, I don't know, local vendors, small vendors?
Yes, there's that also is overseen by DGS. The DVBE and the small business certifications are provided through the DGS office, and for BOE's procurements, there can be DVBE or small business incentives for certain contracts, and the procurement division here at BOE will make that determination as to which contract is appropriate for those incentives.
Okay, and then who is on the procurement team here that makes these decisions on contracts?
It would be in the procurement office. There are several chiefs there. So on one side, there's the goods procurement. On the other side, there's contracts for services. Joseph G. has been appointed the chief of that procurement division.
Okay, so maybe in another hearing when you come back, you know, we kind of would like to know the processes, just to make sure that, you know, everything is being followed and we understand all the processes. And then what, if there's confidentiality requirements, like what is subject to the Public Records Act?
In the government code, generally public agencies that generate documents, everything is public unless there's an exception in Government Code Section 6254. So there are exceptions to the Public Records Act. It depends on the statutory category.
Those were my initial questions.
For discussion, members, it might be helpful as well to share with the members the body of law which created these various different criteria that exist, and to the extent the control agency actually has oversight over our procurement process. The other thing is the members' engagement in that process, and the extent in which we can or cannot engage. Further discussion, members? Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your presentation. Very calm and deliberative, and did an excellent job. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
Yes, we appreciate it. I'm with Mr. Renner. I don't know if I can follow the agenda, but are we there? Ms. Murphy?
I just have one quick last item,
Go right ahead.
and I'm going to ask Ms. Melissa Shelton to please stand. Melissa has worked for BOE for the last 8 years. It's with heavy hearts that she's leaving us to go work for EDD. She will be moving from the budget area to the HR. She has been instrumental in my 3 years of being here. We're really talking about a star. So when we talk about our employees going above and beyond, I think Melissa Shelton definitely demonstrates that. There's not a task that I've put in front of her that she hasn't been able to deliver. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to just wish her well and let her know that her BOE family will always be here.
I just met her.
Oh, nice. Yay. Melissa, I'm sorry to inform you. I had discussions with the director of EDD, and you will be staying. Welcome to the BOE. Those flowers go right to your desk. No.
You won't like it there.
There's not a family over there. Excuse me, EDD. But thank you so very much for your service over the short period of time that we've had to be engaged with you. The exceptional of stepping forward whenever called upon. You know, when there's a line, most people step back. You step forward, and that's always appreciated. Some people step back. Anyway, thank you. We much appreciate it. We noticed here a discussion about the facilities, BOE facilities. Okay, maybe we'll incorporate that. To all of those who are listening in the legislature and so forth, we can be more efficient with a more efficient building. Anyway, thank you very much. We much appreciate it. Yeah. The Board of Equalization is hereby adjourned.